Usually when we look at a massive scientific breakthrough, the narrative arc follows a very predictable trajectory. It's all about precision.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if you are looking at the foundational architecture of the digital age, you kind of expect to find minds that operate exactly like the devices they created. The physics dictates the math dictates the engineering, and the result is just a perfectly logical, verifiable reality.
Right, because the physical sciences demand that kind of rigor. I mean, a circuit either conducts electricity under specific parameters or it doesn't.
Yeah, there's no gray area.
Exactly. The variables are isolated, the hypotheses are tested in these controlled vacuums, and the results are universally reproducible, regardless of the researcher's personal beliefs.
But the moment you step out of the realm of pure applied physics and into the intensely complex world of human biology, sociology, and, well, the long, fraught history of race science, that precision just vanishes.
It really does.
We start looking at a landscape that is incredibly murky, where the variables are, frankly, almost impossible to isolate.
And that murkiness is exactly where diagnostic logic can completely break down. When the scientific method isn't rigorously applied to human populations, motivated reasoning just rushes right in to fill the void.
Right.
A researcher can start with a predetermined social conclusion and simply work backward, just cherry-picking data to support it.
Welcome to today's deep dive. I am thrilled you are joining us because we are unpacking a historical paradox that almost defies belief. We are examining a figure who was, without question, one of the most brilliant architectural minds of the 20th century.
A true pioneer.
Exactly. This is a man who literally provided the foundational hardware for the modern world, only to spend the last several decades of his life as an academic outcast. He basically utilized his massive platform to advocate for widely debunked, highly controversial theories on human genetics.
Based on the stack of historical dossiers we've been reviewing for this, our mission today goes way beyond simply recounting a cautionary tale. Our goal is to explore this historical figure in a fully rendered, multidimensional way to understand a very specific structural mechanism in how society digests information.
Right. The way we perceive authority.
Yes, we are examining how elite credentials in one highly specialized field can be utilized as a sort of intellectual camouflage. It provides this sheen of legitimacy to totally baseless claims in a completely unrelated discipline.
And the individual at the center of this mechanism is William Bradford Shockley. Now, to understand the sheer gravity of his later pivot, we first have to establish the magnitude of his early scientific standing. Because, if you were listening to this on a smartphone, working on a laptop, or if you simply benefit from the global telecommunications network,
Which is everyone.
which is literally everyone, yeah, you are relying on William Shockley's physical research. In the late 1940s, operating out of Bell Laboratories, Shockley led the team that co-invented the transistor.
We really need to pause here and establish the technological landscape before that invention. Because prior to the transistor, the electronic world relied entirely on vacuum tubes.
Oh, vacuum tubes.
Yeah, if you've ever seen the inside of an old vintage radio, vacuum tubes look like small, fragile glass light bulbs. They operated by controlling electron flow in a high vacuum space, which meant they required an incredible amount of heat.
And they were huge.
Massive. They consumed massive amounts of power, took up entire rooms for basic computing, and the filaments burned out constantly, so they required constant physical replacement.
Which made the miniaturization of technology completely impossible. The famous ENIAC computer in the 1940s used around, 18,000 vacuum tubes?
Yep, around 18,000.
It took up 1,800 square feet. And engineers were just constantly sprinting around just to replace the tubes that blew out mid-calculation.
That was the absolute ceiling of human computing power, until Shockley's team arrived at a solid-state solution. In 1947, his colleagues John Bardeen and Walter Brattain demonstrated the first working point contact transistor.
Right.
But Shockley saw the limitations in their design and spent the next few weeks furiously working out the theoretical physics for a vastly superior version, the junction transistor. He successfully developed that in 1948.
That's incredibly fast.
It was brilliant. By using semiconductor materials, specifically manipulating the electron structures of germanium and later silicon, they achieved the exact same control over electrical currents, without the heat, the massive size, or the extreme fragility of the vacuum tube.
He effectively planted the physical seed that grew into the modern technology sector. Fast forward a bit to 1956, he moved to Mountain View, California, and opened Shockley Semiconductor Laboratory.
Which is a whole story in itself.
Oh, yeah. While his management style notoriously drove his top 8 engineers away, the group that literally went on to found Fairchild Semiconductor and essentially birth Silicon Valley, his scientific contribution was completely undisputed.
Mm.
That same year, 1956, William Shockley reached the absolute pinnacle of scientific recognition. Alongside Bardeen and Brattain, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics.
And we have to remember, the cultural authority of a Nobel Prize in physics, particularly in the post-war era, is just difficult to overstate. The scientific establishment essentially certified him as one of the preeminent intellects on the entire globe.
He was a rock star.
Exactly. He was granted a level of public deference that completely transcended his specific discipline.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the narrative takes a really sharp, jarring turn right here. We have an undisputed pioneer of solid-state physics. Yet, beginning in the mid-1960s, Shockley entirely redirects his public focus. He essentially just stops publishing on semiconductors.
Completely stopped.
He steps away from solid-state physics. Instead, he pivots his public career toward genetics, population biology, and race. These are fields where the academic record shows he had absolutely zero formal training, no academic degrees, and zero peer-reviewed publications.
The magnitude of that academic pivot is staggering. I mean, to comprehend how he managed to dominate the national conversation on race and intelligence throughout the 1970s, we really have to scrutinize the social scaffolding that commanded the public to listen to him in the first place.
We have to look at the gravitational pull of the Nobel Prize itself.
Precisely.
That brings us to the concept of the halo effect and what our sources refer to as credential laundering. Before dissecting the architecture of the claims he eventually made, the primary question you have to ask is, why did the media apparatus of the 1970s continually hand this guy a microphone to discuss biology?
The answer lies in how institutions, and really the public as a whole, misinterpret the boundaries of authority. If you do a close reading of the Swedish Academy's 1956 citation, it reveals highly specific parameters. The prize was awarded, and I quote, for their researches on semiconductors and their discovery of the transistor effect.
Very specific.
Right. It was an award recognizing a highly specific manipulation of electron flow. The citation contained absolutely no mention of biological sciences, psychological measurement, sociology, or human genetics.
When you look at the actual text, the boundary is incredibly clear. I look at it like, imagine hiring a master structural engineer who just successfully designed the load-bearing supports for a 100-story skyscraper, and then asking that exact same engineer to perform an intricate open-heart surgery on you.
That would be terrifying.
Yeah. Right. Both the engineering and the surgery require immense spatial intelligence, rigorous mathematical application, and just years of dedicated study. But the domains do not overlap. The expertise required to calculate steel stress tolerances provides zero insight into the function of the human cardiovascular system.
The structural engineer shouldn't be anywhere near an operating room.
Exactly.
Yet, the media landscape of the 1970s operated on a totally different logic. Network television producers, newspaper editors, they all made a fundamental category error. To them, Nobel laureate did not translate to expert in solid-state physics in the public imagination.
What did it translate to?
It translated simply to genius. The assumption was that supreme intelligence in one rigorous domain automatically conferred authoritative insight into all scientific inquiries.
And this is the essence of credential laundering. I mean, if someone takes illicit funds and runs them through a legally recognized business, the money emerges looking legitimate to outside observers.
Right, that's regular money laundering.
Exactly. Shockley essentially took his theories regarding race and intelligence, passed them through the globally recognized institution of his Nobel Prize, and presented them to the average television viewer as serious, scientifically vetted facts.
And the major media outlets of the era played a really crucial role in facilitating this. Just consider the editorial standards of a major newspaper in 1970. If an individual with no biological training whatsoever walked into a newsroom claiming to have uncovered fundamental truths about the genetic destiny of the American population, they would be dismissed out of hand.
They'll be laughed out of the building.
Exactly. But the prestige of Shockley's physics background essentially purchased him a bypassing of the standard academic peer review process. It allowed him to take his claims directly to the public square.
And the dossiers we've reviewed indicate Shockley was not just a passive beneficiary of this media dynamic. He understood the rhetorical weight of his title, and he actively utilized it to frame his public appearances.
Oh, he was highly strategic about his self-presentation. While he continually leveraged the Nobel Prize to secure speaking engagements, he also employed specific linguistic tactics to maintain a facade of academic rigor. For instance, he frequently introduced himself to audiences as a self-proclaimed geneticist.
That specific phrasing is fascinating, self-proclaimed.
Right. It functions as this brilliant rhetorical sleight of hand. By using the term self-proclaimed, he technically issues a qualifier, sort of vaguely acknowledging the absence of formal institutional backing in the field of genetics.
When no one cares about the qualifier.
Exactly. That nuance is immediately buried. The overriding message, and the phrase that inevitably made it into the headlines, was always, Nobel laureate says, whatever his claim was. The lack of credentials was quietly insulated by the overwhelming visibility of the Physics Prize.
Well, with the microphone secured, we really have to examine what he was actually saying. If he lacked a laboratory for genetic sequencing and possessed no trained graduate students in biology, what was the data supporting his public push? We need to shift focus from the social mechanisms of his platform to the specific architecture of the argument he presented to the American public.
His core thesis revolved around a concept he referred to as dysgenics. Now, this wasn't his original term. It has roots reaching back further into the history of eugenics.
Yeah.
Shockley utilized it to describe his theory that the overall intellectual capacity of the American population was in a state of retrogressive evolution.
Meaning we were getting less intelligent as a society.
Yes. And he structured this argument on a highly specific 5-step logical progression.
Let's break down the mechanics of those 5 steps, because on the surface, when you hear them, they attempt to mimic a rigorous scientific deduction.
Step 1 posited that standardized IQ scores were the primary accurate predictors of socially valued outcomes, things like educational attainment, economic success, and law-abiding behavior.
Okay, so IQ equals success.
Right. Step 2 was the assertion that this IQ measure is overwhelmingly genetic. To anchor this, he leaned heavily on a specific metric, that IQ was roughly 80% heritable. This figure was drawn from the highly controversial work of Arthur Jensen, who was an educational psychologist at UC Berkeley.
So the foundation is set, IQ dictates societal success, and IQ is hardwired by genetics. What's step 3?
Step 3 applied this foundation to demographic data. He pointed to census and socioeconomic data indicating that Americans with lower IQ scores, who were heavily overrepresented in historically disadvantaged populations, and specifically the Black community, were statistically having larger families than Americans with higher IQ scores.
So higher birth rates among lower scorers.
Yes. Step 4 was the synthesis of all that. Due to this differential in birth rates among populations he deemed genetically less intelligent, the national average IQ was actively dropping across generations.
In step 5.
Step 5 was his inevitable policy conclusion. The government must intervene with corrective measures to halt this decline.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you are a layperson watching a televised debate in 1972, and you hear a Nobel laureate lay out this sequential 5-point list, it carries the cadence of irrefutable math. It sounds logical.
It does.
But the historical scientific consensus shows that trained geneticists and biologists of the era identified a fatal structural flaw in the very early stages of this argument. The entire tower collapses at step 2.
Yes. The scientific community pointed out a profound category error regarding the application of heritability estimates. And this is a foundational concept in population genetics.
Right.
A heritability estimate, such as the 80% figure Shockley utilized, measures the variation of a specific trait within a defined population, operating under a specific set of environmental conditions.
Within a defined population.
Exactly. It is a statistical measurement of variance. It provides absolutely zero scientific basis for explaining the genetic differences between two completely different populations that have lived under vastly different environmental, historical, and socioeconomic conditions.
Let's ground that statistical concept in a physical reality for a second, because understanding the distinction between within-group and between-group variance is the absolute key to dismantling pseudoscientific race theories.
It's crucial.
Imagine you have a bag of corn seeds. They are a genetically diverse mix, but they are drawn from the exact same bag. You take half those seeds and plant them in a highly controlled, perfect greenhouse. You've got optimal soil, automated watering, perfect sunlight.
Ideal conditions.
Right. Then you take the other half of the exact same bag of seeds and plant them in a rocky, barren field with poor drainage and minimal sunlight.
Well, the results of that are highly predictable.
Right. Within the greenhouse, some plants will grow to 8 feet tall and some to 6 feet. Because the environment is uniform for all of them, the variation in height within the greenhouse is entirely due to genetics. It has a high heritability.
That makes sense.
Now look at the rocky field. All the plants are stunted, maybe averaging 3 feet tall. Again, the differences between the individual stunted plants in the field are genetic. But if you compare the average height of the greenhouse population to the average height of the field population, that difference is not genetic at all.
No, because they came from the exact same bat.
Exactly. The massive disparity is entirely the result of the environmental conditions.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the flaw in Shockley's methodology.
Yeah.
The scientific consensus argued that Shockley willfully ignored the massive environmental variables inherent in IQ testing. We're talking about centuries of systemic inequality, educational disenfranchisement, and massive wealth disparity experienced by Black Americans.
He just ignored all of it.
He did. He completely conflated within-group heritability with between-group differences. And critics and historians view this not as an accidental oversight by a brilliant mind, but as a textbook case of motivated reasoning.
And motivated reasoning operates in the exact opposite direction of the scientific method. Like, instead of gathering disparate evidence, controlling for variables, and following the data to an unknown conclusion.
Right. The normal way.
Motivated reasoning starts with the desired conclusion firmly in place. And then you selectively hunt backward for any data points that appear to support it, while discarding the massive context that contradicts it.
And the historical record points to one specific claim Shockley made as the most explicit evidence of this motivated reasoning. In his public lectures, he advanced the argument that the intelligence of Black Americans was, quote, directly proportional to their percentage of Caucasian blood.
Wait, he just stated that as a fact.
He delivered this statement to the public as if it were a rigorously derived biological fact. Yet the dossiers confirm he possessed absolutely no genetic sequencing data to support this.
Because it didn't exist.
Exactly. He hadn't conducted a large-scale chromosomal analysis correlating ancestry with cognitive test scores. He simply stated a hierarchical racial assumption as a scientific finding.
He presented a predetermined social hierarchy disguised in the vernacular of biology. But to fully understand how this gains so much traction, we have to look beyond Shockley himself. We have to examine the broader ecosystem that amplified these claims.
Yes, because he wasn't operating entirely in a vacuum. Shockley heavily cited the work of Arthur Jensen, whose 1969 article in the Harvard Educational Review argued against the efficacy of environmental interventions, like the Head Start program, based on that exact same 80% heritability claim.
To the average citizen consuming the evening news, this presented a really compelling illusion of independent scientific consensus. You had a prominent educational psychologist at UC Berkeley and a Nobel Prize-winning physicist at Stanford. They seemed to be working independently from different disciplines, yet converging on the exact same controversial conclusion about genetics and societal outcomes.
But that appearance of independent convergence was meticulously funded. The historical financial records reveal a significant paper trail connecting the research of both men to a single source.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
An organization called the Pioneer Fund, which was established in 1937 by a wealthy textile heir named Wycliffe Draper.
The history of the Pioneer Fund is crucial context here. It wasn't a generalized scientific grant foundation. Its foundational mandate from the 1930s was explicitly dedicated to funding research that promoted eugenics and the concept of racial hierarchy. They were looking to bankroll very specific answers.
And the financial logistics show that the Pioneer Fund directed substantial resources to Shockley's efforts. Adjusted for inflation, records indicate they funneled roughly $1.5 million to him between 1969 and 1976.
That is a massive amount of money.
It is. This money was routed through various channels, some as grants to Stanford University, some to a private foundation Shockley himself established, and some as direct personal donations from Draper.
And the other primary recipient of Pioneer Fund grants during this era was Arthur Jensen. So the public was witnessing an echo chamber. Shockley wasn't independently replicating Jensen's psychological data.
No, not at all.
He was absorbing it, amplifying it through the immense megaphone of his Nobel Prize, while both researchers were financially tethered to an organization actively soliciting this exact demographic narrative.
The funding structure reveals a severe compromise of independent scientific inquiry. However, Shockley's ambitions extended way beyond dominating academic journals or television debates. He sought to translate his theory of dysgenics into actionable federal legislation.
A theory to policy.
Yes, and this transition from theoretical posturing to concrete policy formulation really demonstrates how abstract pseudoscientific debates invariably demand real-world applications.
We really need to examine the specific mechanics of the policy he campaigned for, which he titled the Voluntary Sterilization Bonus Plan. It is vital to look at the granular details of this proposal, not as some abstract historical footnote, but as a serious legislative framework that a globally recognized scientist aggressively promoted at major universities.
The architecture of the plan was starkly transactional. Shockley proposed that the federal government establish a financial incentive structure to encourage the sterilization of citizens with lower cognitive scores.
And the payout was tied to an IQ test,
Yep.
right?
Yes, the payment was mathematically pegged to standardized IQ tests. The government would offer an individual $1,000 for every single point their IQ score fell below the baseline of 100.
He frequently used a specific hypothetical to illustrate this math. He would calculate the payout for an individual who scored a 70 on a standardized IQ test.
Right. In outlining the policy, he suggested that an individual scoring 70, who he categorized as biologically unfit to reproduce, would be eligible for a significant payout because 70 is 30 points below the baseline.
So 30 times 1,000.
Exactly. Therefore, the government would pay them $30,000 to undergo permanent sterilization. He also stipulated that this money would not be distributed as a lump sum, but rather placed into a government-managed trust fund to ensure long-term financial control.
We really have to unpack the demographic reality embedded in those numbers. Because Shockley attempted to present this purely as an intervention based on cognitive scores, he actively denied that it was a policy targeting any specific racial group.
He presented his calculations as objective demographic forecasting. Based on the standardized testing metrics of the early 1970s metrics, the developmental psychologists widely acknowledged were culturally biased and heavily influenced by socioeconomic status. Shockley noted that roughly 85% of the Black American population would theoretically qualify for this sterilization bonus.
85%.
Yes. But he maintained that this was merely where the data led him, framing it as a mathematical coincidence rather than a targeted eugenics program.
The scientific and sociological communities universally rejected that framing. The consensus argued that because IQ tests heavily reflect environmental inputs, access to early childhood education, generational wealth, community resources tying a sterilization incentive to those scores was functionally identical to targeting historically marginalized populations. The test was literally just a proxy.
And this brings us to his inclusion of the word voluntary in the title of his plan.
This is such a critical point regarding the mechanics of coercion. If a policy targets a demographic that has faced centuries of systemic wealth extraction and legislated poverty, and the government suddenly dangles a $30,000 trust fund, which was an enormous sum of money in the 1970s economy.
Life-changing money for a lot of people.
Absolutely life-changing. But the exchange is the permanent severing of their reproductive capacity. At that point, the concept of a free choice just evaporates. Historians and ethicists analyzing the plan point out that overwhelming financial leverage directed at an impoverished population is not a voluntary transaction. It is profound economic coercion.
It really is. Now, recognizing the explosive nature of what he was actually proposing, Shockley frequently utilized a specific rhetorical defense mechanism when presenting this plan to academic audiences. He would introduce the sterilization bonus plan and immediately categorize it as a thinking exercise.
A thinking exercise. By framing a national policy proposal as a thinking exercise, he was attempting to claim the traditional protections of academic detachment. It's the equivalent of saying, well, I am merely proposing this hypothetical to test the boundaries of our societal logic.
But the scientific community at the time heavily criticized this maneuver. They pointed out the intense contradiction of demanding academic shelter while simultaneously traveling the entire country, appearing on national television, and relentlessly advocating for the biological premises that necessitated the policy.
The question then becomes one of institutional response. How did elite academic institutions, places ostensibly committed to the principles of free inquiry, manage the physical presence of a Nobel laureate utilizing their campuses to promote a state-funded eugenics program?
The historical record shows that universities inadvertently legitimized his platform by attempting to engage with him through traditional academic frameworks.
Treating him like a normal scholar.
Right. And the most illustrative example of this dynamic played out at Princeton University in the winter of 1973.
The events at Princeton on December 4th, 1973 really highlight the inherent vulnerabilities of the formal debate format. Let's set the scene. The university had agreed to host Shockley for a debate. Initially, Roy Innis, who was the national director of the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, was scheduled as his opponent.
Right.
However, Innis withdrew from the event in protest after the university decided to restrict audience attendance exclusively to Princeton students and faculty. They completely barred the broader public and press from the hall. So, stepping in as the replacement opponent was Ashley Montagu.
And Montague's credentials made him seem perfectly suited to dismantle Shockley's arguments.
Yeah.
He was a highly respected physical anthropologist who had spent decades studying the intersection of biology and sociology. In 1942, he had literally written the book on the subject, a foundational text titled Man's Most Dangerous Myth, The Fallacy of Race.
So he was the expert.
He really was. The setup inside McCosh Hall promised a rigorous intellectual takedown. You're the deeply knowledgeable humanist scholar confronting the physicist who is operating way outside his discipline.
But the reality inside the auditorium was far less interactive. An audience of roughly 400 students and faculty watched Montagu meticulously deconstruct the biological concept of race. He cited anthropological data to prove that human genetic variation does not align with socially constructed racial categories.
And Shockley's response.
According to contemporary reports, Shockley appeared entirely unfazed by Montagu's evidence. He simply approached the podium, delivered his rehearsed presentation on dysgenics, repeated his claims about Caucasian blood percentages, and largely ignored the anthropological data Montagu had presented. It was characterized less as a debate and more as two entirely separate lectures delivered in the exact same room.
But the true impact of the event wasn't happening at the podium. It was happening outside McCosh Hall.
Outside the building, a crowd equal in size to the audience inside, roughly 400 individuals, had gathered. This was a coalition of student activist groups, members of the local Black community, and various civil rights organizations. They were marching, chanting, and holding placards.
And crucially, because Shockley was a Nobel laureate engaging in a highly controversial event, the national television networks had dispatched camera crews to cover it.
Of course they did.
The defining image of the evening became the protesters outside, burning an effigy of William Shockley while the cameras rolled. What's fascinating here is the structural trap that Princeton fell into. We can refer to this as the debate trap. By organizing a formally sanctioned debate, complete with a podium and a distinguished academic opponent, the institution implicitly signaled to the public that Shockley's theory of dysgenics was a legitimate, competing scientific hypothesis worthy of an equal platform.
It's the inherent flaw in applying formal debate rules to motivated reasoning. There's an old analogy about the futility of playing chess with a pigeon. You can master the strategy, understand every opening, and play a perfect game. But the pigeon is just going to knock over all the pieces, soil the board, and strut around acting like it won.
That's a very apt analogy.
Montagu brought peer-reviewed anthropological data to the chessboard, but Shockley simply deployed his predetermined talking points. And the television coverage didn't focus on Montagu's data. It focused on the burning effigy. The institutional attempt to debunk him ultimately provided him with national airtime and, frankly, framed him as a martyr for academic freedom. To the TV viewer, he looked like he was silenced by an emotional mob rather than defeated by scientific consensus.
The Princeton event really established a turbulent template. Over the next few years, the dossiers detail a cascade of institutional chaos surrounding his speaking engagements. In early 1974, the Yale Political Union invited Shockley to debate, which sparked massive campus outrage before they ultimately voted to rescind the invitation.
Which didn't end it.
No, because another campus organization at Yale immediately attempted to re-invite him, leading to further administrative collapse.
The student newspapers, particularly the Harvard Crimson, covered the fallout extensively. But again, the media narrative shifted completely away from the biological inaccuracies of his claims and centered almost entirely on the procedural drama of free speech controversies at Ivy League institutions.
And the disruptions just escalated.
Mm-hmm.
In 1975, Shockley was invited to deliver a lecture on the history of science at the University of Kansas. The event was entirely disrupted by hecklers to the point where Shockley had to be escorted out and physically flee the campus.
Wow.
Yeah. And across the Atlantic, the University of Leeds in the UK had arranged to award him an honorary degree in engineering, recognizing his work on the transistor. As the reality of his eugenics advocacy became widely known in Britain, the university was forced into the highly embarrassing position of publicly withdrawing the honor.
These events force a broader historical analysis on how society handles the propagation of deeply harmful misinformation. does engaging with pseudoscientific figures in high-profile settings, even with the explicit intent of disproving them, inadvertently serve their ultimate goal by granting them the oxygen of mainstream attention? The universities eventually concluded that it did.
By the late 1970s and into the early 1980s, the academic invitation ceased. The formal debates evaporated. Mainstream scientific journals refused to publish his biological writings. He was effectively ostracized by the scientific establishment.
But Shockley was fundamentally unwilling to accept obscurity. To maintain his public visibility, he sought out a new venue that did not require academic peer review. He found it in the federal court system.
Ah, yes, the shift to a legal strategy. This culminated in a highly publicized 1984 libel trial.
The catalyst for this trial was an article written by a science journalist named Roger Witherspoon, which was published 4 years earlier in the Atlanta Constitution. In assessing Shockley's voluntary sterilization bonus plan, Witherspoon drew a direct historical parallel. He compared the mechanics of Shockley's proposed government eugenics program to the genetic engineering experiments conducted by the Nazi regime.
Given that Shockley was actively touring the country, proposing a state-funded program designed to permanently alter the genetic makeup of the population, specifically targeting a minority demographic based on inherent biological assumptions, journalists and historians viewed the comparison as historically grounded.
It wasn't a huge leap.
Exactly. However, Shockley saw an opportunity. He filed a massive $1.25 million defamation lawsuit against Cox Enterprises, the parent company of the newspaper.
But the legal correspondence covering the trial noted a very specific dynamic here. Shockley's primary motivation did not actually appear to be financial restitution. The trial, held in a federal courtroom in Atlanta in September of 1984, provided him with a legally mandated audience.
It was a platform.
Exactly. It was a mechanism to force his theories on race and intelligence back into the daily news cycle, this time filtered through the lens of dramatic courtroom reporting rather than academic journals.
The legal proceedings hinged on the strict definitions of defamation law. After days of testimony, which Shockley utilized to reiterate his theories on dysgenics right there on the witness stand, the jury was sent to deliberate. They returned in a remarkably swift 3.5 hours.
That's fast for a complex trial.
Very fast. Their verdict was a precise parsing of the law. They concluded that, from a strictly legal standpoint, explicitly comparing an American citizen to a Nazi in a widely circulated publication crossed the threshold into defamation. The article had technically exceeded the strict factual boundaries. Therefore, the jury found in favor of William Shockley.
So they ruled that he had been libeled. But the true judgment of the jury was delivered in the damages phase. What was the financial award?
The jury awarded William Shockley a total of exactly $1 in damages.
$1. The legal architecture of a libel suit is designed to financially compensate an individual for the calculable damage inflicted upon their public reputation. By awarding a single dollar against a $1.25 million claim, 12 jurors in Atlanta essentially issued a legally binding declaration.
A statement of worth.
Right. They acknowledged the technical foul by the newspaper, but simultaneously concluded that the public reputation of a Nobel Prize-winning physicist had already been so thoroughly and irreparably decimated by his own decade-long crusade of pseudoscience, it possessed an effective monetary value of zero. It was impossible to damage his standing any further.
Biographers of Shockley frequently highlight the $1 verdict as the definitive societal repudiation. Outside of the small network subsidized by the Pioneer Fund, the broader public and the legal system had rendered their final assessment.
The ultimate tragedy of the narrative is whether that repudiation ever really penetrated his own self-perception. Did the isolation, the rescinded honors, and the symbolic $1 verdict ever prompt a reevaluation of his methodology or his conclusions?
The historical evidence suggests he remained entirely resolute in his worldview. He just doubled down. And this is perhaps best illustrated by his actions regarding a highly controversial organization established in Southern California, the Repository for Germinal Choice.
Often referred to in the media as the Nobel Sperm Bank.
Yes. The facility was founded by Robert Graham, an optometrist who held very strong eugenicist views. The explicit stated mission of the repository was to collect and distribute the genetic material of men who had achieved extreme intellectual distinction, specifically targeting Nobel laureates. The goal was to selectively improve the human gene pool.
Did many laureates participate?
Well, while the repository claimed to have approached several laureates, Shockley was the only one to publicly and proudly confirm his participation as a donor.
Wow, his participation really illustrates how completely he had internalized his own claims. He did not view his isolation as evidence of error. He genuinely believed that his biological makeup was inherently superior and that propagating his specific genetic code was a vital service to the future of the human species.
William Shockley died in 1989 at the age of 79 from prostate cancer. He was residing near the Stanford campus where he had retained his faculty appointment, though he remained entirely marginalized within the university community. He died estranged from his children and isolated from the vast majority of the scientific establishment he had once helped lead.
It's a stark ending.
It took decades for the scientific journals to fully address the legacy of his public pivot. It was not until 2022 that Science, which is widely considered the journal of record for the American scientific community, published a formal retrospective reassessment of his career.
And what did they say?
The article did not obscure his scientific achievements, but it definitively categorized his later work. They stated unequivocally, Shockley was a racist and eugenicist.
Synthesizing the entirety of these historical dossiers, William Shockley represents an enduring structural case study. He demonstrates how motivated reasoning, the act of prioritizing a desired social outcome over the rigorous demands of the scientific method, can sustain itself for decades. He started with a hierarchical assumption regarding human biology and spent the rest of his life contorting data to fit that mold.
And the mechanism that allowed that contortion to command the national spotlight for so long was the armor provided by elite credentials. The story illustrates the immense vulnerability of a society that equates specialized technical brilliance with universal wisdom.
Which brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with today. We've spent this time analyzing the media landscape and the academic controversies of the 1970s. But if you look at the architecture of our modern information streams, the exact same vulnerabilities exist.
They absolutely do.
We are constantly inundated with claims about public health, complex foreign policy, and the fundamental structures of our society. It requires asking a critical question of the media we consume. Who are the figures we are granting a free pass to today? Just because an individual revolutionized digital communication or engineered a brilliant aerospace company or achieved the pinnacle of success in the entertainment industry does not grant them inherent authority over the complexities of epidemiology or the nuances of human sociology.
The historical record clearly shows that true expertise is incredibly narrow. The authority of the messenger should never preempt the rigorous questioning of the message itself, regardless of how prestigious the title preceding their name might be.
A massive thank you for taking the time to join us on this deep dive. Keep critically evaluating the sources of your information, keep asking the difficult questions, and we will see you next time.